public image of Metallica frontman James Hetfield is that of a beer-sucking, hard-case lone wolf. But for the lead singer and guitarist of one of the biggest bands in heavy metal history, that brand is misleading. James is an emotional character who felt he needed to keep up that tough metal frontman appearance to compensate for his insecurities. As James matured, he started to realize he needed to confront those insecurities head on, and so he underwent an experiment. James would leave his old lyric writing style in the past and would try something he'd never done before, writing personal. And for James, that meant confronting a religious childhood that alienated him from society. James Hetfield was raised by his parents in the religion of Christian Science, with the belief that God would heal the body and shield them from being sick or injured. Thus, all medical treatment and study of human biology was shunned.
It was very alienating for me as a child, being raised this religion, and how I couldn't attend certain health classes at school. You know, when you're in elementary school, you want to be hanging out with the buddies and doing stuff together, and all of a sudden, they'd get their health books out, and I wasn't supposed to learn about the body because, this is just a shell for your soul and all of this.
With 1991's Black album, part of Metallica's decision to move towards more simple songs meant hiring a new producer. Bob Rock was a former small-time Canadian musician who was coming off the success of producing Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. The guys in Metallica were sold on Bob's ear for a commercial sound. One of the first areas Bob went to work on came with James's lyric writing. James had always written about topics outside himself. He never did the singer-songwriter cliché of looking within. Bob not only pushed James to write more personal, but also more simple and more poetic. The exercise of being vulnerable opened up a lot of those childhood wounds for James, and he would channel that renewed anger on the God that failed. The God That Failed was written about James's mother and her refusal of cancer treatment because of her Christian Science beliefs. When she was diagnosed, the only help she would take was in the form of prayer, and she ultimately died. His father had already left the family a few years prior, leaving James without either parent by the age of 16. Pride you took, pride you feel, pride that you feel when you kneel. Not the word, not the love, not what you thought from above. In the chorus, James clearly feels betrayed by the lies in Christian Science he was told growing up, that if you pray and have faith, God will heal you. Broken is the promise, betrayal. Although not as specific as The God That Failed, the Black Album's second single provided James an outlet for the anger over his upbringing in The Unforgiven. In it, James takes aim at collectivism, the idea that the individual should be subjugated to the group, in other words, forced conformity, something he felt a lot of as a child. It opens in an almost story-like fashion, describing the discoveries of a character, a boy. New blood joins his earth, and quickly he's subdued. Through constant pain, disgrace, the young boy learns their rules. He has to act hypocritically on the outside to avoid ridicule by society. He desperately fights to remain free at heart and to fight the conformity, but the boy becomes a beaten-down, apathetic man. Throughout his life the same, he's battled constantly. This fight he cannot win. A tired man they see no longer cares. It's clear James has looked back on his childhood and saw the dark path his life could have gone. When a philosophy of living life is hammered into you over and over as a child, and you slowly find more flaws in it, it's got to feel like your whole world is crashing down.
It's a lot of misspent anger that has come out sideways for a lot of people. And if I hadn't had music in my life, it's quite possible I could be in here or not even in here, be dead. And I'd much rather be alive.
The chorus and outro of The Unforgiven is a depressing snapshot of how James viewed his own childhood, feeling deprived of all his own thoughts and forced to follow the rules of this religion. The child's vow to maintain his own will in spite of the controlling environment has failed.
What I felt, what I've known, never shine through on what I've shown, never free, never me, so I dubbed the Unforgiven.
With the Black Album, James's armor came off, and he realized that writing about your own vulnerabilities was therapy. The portrayal of the fearless frontman with no time for insecurities just became exhausting. Bob Rock pushed him to use that feeling of alienation as fuel to channel it into his art, rather than maintaining his old approach of watching the news and writing a fucking tune about it, as he'd later say. Plus, the simplicity in the music on the Black Album, more groove and slower tempos, allowed James to flex his songwriting muscle more. It's why Metallica became as huge as they did, and what set them apart from the rest of their metal contemporaries, who knew heavy and vulnerable could work. The Unforgiven was a reflection of how James felt at the time, still angry at his parents. But little did he know, writing about this deep-seated resentment would years later lead him to finding forgiveness.
So I dubbed the Unforgiven.